Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. Currently, we are in John, the Gospel of John, chapter 3. And again, crawling through this chapter because this is a foundational chapter that Jesus is teaching us what salvation is. Most of Christianity doesn't understand or teach what biblical salvation is. They teach salvation through the lens of their denomination, their tradition. When we get into arguments or debates, for example, what's called the once saved, always saved argument or debate, there are some that believe that once you're saved, you are always saved. And then there are others that argue that said, no, 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 you're not, you could lose your salvation. Now, those who argue against the once saved, always saved narrative never, as we're going into John chapter 3, for example, they never build their theology on this chapter. And I mean, there are other ones, Romans 3, Galatians 3. They never build, and I will say this, you know, there are there are different subject matters in the Bible. So, for example, if I wanted to understand end time prophecies, there are certain books in the Bible, passages in the Bible that I should study. The Old Testament prophecies, the writings of the prophets, for example. You really won't have a good understanding without understanding Old Testament prophecies. Obviously, the book of Revelations. But there are other passages as well that the writer was teaching on salvation as its subject. It's its subject. They were teaching on salvation. I kind of liken it like if you go to a school and you walk into the hallway, class 101 is for salvation. Class 102 is for end time prophecy. Class 103 is I don't know what subject I should pick there. History, right? And the point is that if you're going to learn mostly from class 101 prophecy, that's what you're going to learn. Now, there are obviously statements in books. I mean, think statements that you will, from that you may get, but they're not even with salvation. But they're not. You don't build your theology on the one statement. For example, in that classroom, because he's teaching on the subject of Classroom 102, prophecy. Well, Classroom 101, they're teaching on salvation. And that's what I'm saying. Those who argue against once saved, always saved, never go to Classroom 101. And of course, what we're talking about as an example, the chapter here, this chapter 3, this discourse from verses 1 to 19, where Jesus is teaching on salvation, you'll never see them teach on that. You'll never see them to explain how, whether it's water baptism, whether it's living right, you'll never see them explain what Jesus means in these chapters. All right, let's get to it. I'm going to pick this up in verse, because I'm going to pick this up in verse 13, and keep this in mind. Nicodemus a man who was an expert in the law, a man that has lived his entire life experience has been to understand the law of Moses, to keep the law of Moses. Okay? And yet Jesus tells this man he has to be born again. I'm going to pick it up at verse 13. He says, no one has ascended into heaven except the one who descended from heaven, the Son of Man. Now, Jesus makes this statement having said in verse 10, verse 11, he said, I assure you, we speak what we know and testify what we have seen. Right? And if you go back to chapter 1, remember Jesus said, no one has seen the Father but the only begotten Son, who is at the Father's side. He has revealed the Father. So verse 13, no one is ascended in heaven. Also, too, Jesus is kind of quoting a verse in Deuteronomy. No, it's not the one here. Yeah, Deuteronomy 30. Let me see if I can pull that up right quick. Deuteronomy 30. Now, the reason why I'm going to do that is because, keep this in mind, Jesus is speaking to Nicodemus. Okay? Where am I at here? I may leave this up here, a couple of verses to come to. Is it? Did I want this? Oh man, this is not the one I think I'm going to want either. Okay, where does that show you people we know? Okay, let's see. Deuteronomy 30, 12. Is this the one I want? No, that's not what I want. No. Okay, I'm gonna go on because I don't think I'm going to find this. Okay. I can't find the verse I want here. All right, verse 13 again. No one has ascended into heaven except the one who had descended, the Son of Man. There's a verse in Deuteronomy, and I think it's later on though, where Moses talks about, ascending. No one is ascending to heaven, but the one who's come down from heaven. Okay, but anyway, I goofed that up, so let me move on. All right. Verse 14. Now, this is going to be a very interesting verse here because this verse, remember, he is going to, we're going to get to obviously John 3:16, but notice that he starts this verse here, right? He says, just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, so that everyone who believes in him will have eternal life. Okay, so Jesus starts with this. Notice, just as Moses lifted the snake in the wilderness. Sometimes these reference here. Numbers 21. Let me see if I can find it. I want you to see the story here that Jesus used. All right, Numbers. Which one did I say here? I want you to see the story because this is a very perplexing story to some. All right, 21. Here we go. So I'm going to read this story because this is the one that Jesus is quoting. He says, then they set out from Mount Hor. By the way, this is in the 40th year of Israel wandering in the wilderness. If you're not familiar with the story, when God brought Israel out of Egypt, they kept sinning. I mean, from day one, they started murmuring and complaining. And then it got to a place 3 months into after they were delivered. They saw God break the neck of Egypt, all of the with the 10 plagues attacking the Egyptian gods, the death of the firstborn of Egypt, going through the Red Sea. 3 months after that, they make the golden calf. So it's not looking good for Israel. Going into their second year, God says, "All right, they've wandered enough, and they're now they're gonna they're at the edge of the Jordan River. It's time to cross over into the Promised Land." God says, "Send 2 spies out," and then they came back and go, "Oh no, we need to send more." Okay, let's send more spies out. So then finally, okay, God and Moses relented and said, "Okay, send 12 spies out." Well, those 12 spies went out. And they came back and they said, "It's a great land. However, there are giants in the land. Man, we're not going to, they'll eat us up," right? And then from that, God said, "Okay, you guys have had enough." So he said, "This generation that I brought out, every last one of you will die on this side of the Jordan. Every one of you, except Joshua and Caleb. And even Moses didn't make it over because of a later sin. So they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. And now in this 40, what we see right here, in this 40th year, the last of that generation is dying out. But then this is what happens. So then they sent out from Mount Hor, by the way, of the Red Sea to bypass the land of Edom. But the people became impatient because of the journey. The people spoke against Moses and God and Moses. Why have you led us from Egypt to die in the wilderness? There is no bread, no water, and we detest this wretched food. Then the Lord sent poisonous snakes among the people, and they bit them so that many Israelites died. Okay, so that's the judgment. You see the judgment, and he said many people died. All right. So verse 7 says, then the people came to Moses and said, "We have sinned by speaking against the Lord and against you. Intercede with the Lord so that he will take away the snakes from us." And Moses interceded for the people. And the Lord said to Moses, make a snake image and mount it on the pole. When anyone who is bitten looks at it, he will recover. So Moses made the bronze snake and mounted it on a pole. And whenever someone was bitten and he looked at the bronze snake, he recovered. Now, this is one of the most perplexing things. I don't know why, in the word, but a lot of people would wonder about the bronze snake. And by the way, later on, this bronze snake would be a stumbling block to Israel. One of the always sins of Israel before the Babylonian invasion was that they were idolatrous. They just kept falling into idolatry. But anyway, and so this bronze snake would become that. But right here, this bronze snake becomes a symbol of Jesus and salvation. So this is the story, okay? So this is the story that Jesus is citing. So he says, just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness. Then he says, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, so that everyone who believes in him will have eternal life. So we just read the story. The salvation, when those people were bitten by poisonous snake, if they looked at the bronze snake, again, it is perplexing why God would make a snake a bronze snake. Okay, but nevertheless, if you were bitten by a snake, look at the bronze snake. And then he said, if you look at that, so he lifted it up. The illustration is that, notice the snake was lifted up, and notice you didn't have to perform rituals, traditions, or anything like that. He says, if you were bitten by a poisonous snake, all you had to do is to look at the bronze snake. That's all you had to do, is look at the bronze snake. Simple enough. So if you're bitten by a snake and you want to argue, okay, you argue until you die, but notice people looked at the snake. Now, you also have to keep this in mind, why Jesus is saying this. He's saying this to a man who knows this story. He knows it well. And in this story, Jesus points out a symbol of himself, a symbol of Christ in this story. You could say a symbol of Christ in the Old Testament, right? Jesus said this, just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness. That incident becomes a symbol of salvation. And just as it is perplexing to us, it was perplexing to Nicodemus, and again, the Pharisees. However, it's there. Didn't matter if you understood it or not, it was there. And so God said, if you were bitten, you wanted to be healed of a poisonous snake bite, look at the snake. Look at the snake. And now Jesus is telling Nicodemus, just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up. Why? So that everyone who believes in him will have eternal life. And you will note that the focus of salvation is on Jesus, not on works. And this is what you would see. This is what you would see with religion. They always tell you some form of human effort. You must do something in order to be saved, in order to, it's human effort. It's man's effort to get to God. What we see here is God's grace, God's efforts reaching down to man. Okay? So just as Moses lifted up the snake, and that became a symbol of salvation, that became a source of salvation. Then he says, so everyone who believes in him will have eternal life. So now, notice this, everyone who believes in him. So what does the word belief mean? Because you'd be surprised at how many people argue over this. Right? So notice here, anyone that believes in him. Why? Because God lifted Jesus. God lifted Jesus as the point of salvation. And when you believe. So what does it mean to believe? So the word believe is faith. The word faith, the English translations here, faith and belief. Faith and belief. All right. These are they're synonymous. One is the noun and then one is the verb. And so this right here becomes the way of salvation. And I'll get into this next time. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to VP the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I'll see you in the next study.